He saved the judge's daughter from death. Now she must choose between him and her father. Before we dive into the story, like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The desert was burning when the chains finally snapped. Gunfire echoed through the gulch as the prison wagon overturned, sending horses screaming into the dust. Silas Vance hit the ground hard, rolling through broken sage and shale. The air stank of blood and powder. 2 lawmen lay dead, another shouting orders he'd never finish. Silas didn't wait to think. He grabbed the closest rifle and a half-wild mare still tethered to the wreck, kicked loose, and rode straight into the wilderness. By sundown, he was bleeding from a graze across his ribs and a bullet lodged shallow in his shoulder. The sky stretched wide and merciless, painted in red fire. Every mile carried another bounty rider behind him, another prayer that his horse wouldn't stumble. He'd broken too many prisons to fall to the desert now. A storm moved in like a dark wall, wind twisting the sand into spirals. Lightning stalked the horizon. He found the outline of a cabin near a dry creek bed, half-rotted boards, chimney cracked, roof caved on one side, but shelter was shelter. Silas tied the horse beneath a lean-to and stumbled inside, bleeding on the dirt floor. He tore a strip from his sleeve and pressed it against the wound. Then came the sound, faint, desperate, carried on thunder, a cry. He froze. Another flash of lightning carved the earth open, and in its light he saw a horse riderless in the distance, reins trailing. He pulled his coat over his shoulder, stepped back into the storm, and followed the sound. She was lying near a wash, her dress torn, face streaked with blood and mud, young, no more than mid-20s. He checked her pulse. Weak, but there. He should have walked away. Every minute spent here was another noose tightening somewhere. But he couldn't. Something in her stillness, some reminder of the people gone because of him, kept him there. He lifted her into his arms, carried her through the wind, and laid her beside the faint fire he'd built. When he brushed hair from her neck, he saw it, a small silver pendant marked with the crest of Judge Nathaniel Harrow, the same judge who'd condemned Silas to hang 2 years ago. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. He sat staring at the necklace, stormlight flickering over his face. If he left her, she'd die before morning. If he stayed, he'd die soon after, by the judge's rope or someone else's gun. The wind rattled the windows. He poured the last of his water on her wound, bandaged it with careful hands, then sank beside her, eyes half closed. "You're safe," he whispered, though both of them knew it was a lie. The storm raged on as sleep took him, one fugitive guarding the daughter of his enemy. By dawn, the thunder had moved west, leaving the land washed clean and cold. Sunlight crept into the broken cabin. Silas awoke to the click of a hammer. The girl, pale but alert, was aiming his own revolver at him. "Don't move," she rasped, arms trembling. He raised his hand slowly. "Easy there. You fire that thing. It'll knock you back through the wall." Her eyes narrowed. "Who are you? Where's Boone?" "Boone?" He forced a calm smile. "Ain't seen him. Name's—" He hesitated. The wanted posters used to flutter outside every saloon from Texas to Carson City. "Name's Ellis, just a drifter. Found you near the wash." She studied his face, recognition flickering in her weary eyes. I've seen you somewhere." He shrugged. "Plenty of faces out here look the same, miss." Her fingers weakened. The gun lowered an inch before slipping from her grasp. She fell back against the cot, exhausted. "They took me. Boone Callister and his men. They said my father would pay to have me back." The name hit Silas harder than any bullet. Boone, the same Boone who'd ridden beside him, planned robberies with him, laughed across campfires, and then betrayed him the night of the ambush that ended everything. "You know him?" she asked faintly, catching the change in his eyes. "I used to," he said. "Long time ago." She looked away, lips pressed tight. "He said I'd never make it back, that they'd send my father a piece of me instead." Silas poured water into a tin cup, set it near her hand. "Drink. You'll need strength if we're getting out of here." "We? You think I'm leaving you to Boone's mercy? You don't even know who I am." He glanced at the necklace gleaming in the light. "I've got a guess." Her hand went instinctively to her throat. "Then you know what my father does to men like you." He almost smiled. "Yeah, I know." Hours later, after patching what gear they could, they rode out, her leaning against him on the mare's back. The desert shimmered, endless and hostile. She tried to thank him, but the words snagged somewhere between pride and fear. "How far to town?" she asked. 2 days if we ride straight. Less if your horse don't mind me bleeding on her." "I could ride alone." "You'd make it 5 miles before the buzzards did." She sighed, too weak to argue further. As the ridge rose behind them, Silas glanced once at the empty cabin, smoke curling from its chimney. He'd planned to vanish there, but plans didn't last long in this territory. By evening, they camped near a dry riverbed. She drifted off before the fire burned low, murmuring in her sleep, "Father, please." He stared into the flames, remembering the judge's voice pronouncing sentence years ago. Cold, righteous, convinced men like Silas could never change. He told himself this was only duty, a debt to balance old ghosts. But when she stirred, shivering from fever, he pulled his coat over her shoulders without thinking. "Come morning." She woke calmer. "You could take the reward," she said softly, "if you bring me home alive." He looked at her, not answering. "You want money, don't you?" "Not this kind." "You hate my father." He considered the truth, then said only, "Your father hates me." Beyond the hills, the sun bled across jagged rock like a wound. Eliza Harrow, he knew her name now, stared at the endless emptiness and whispered, "Sometimes I think justice makes worse men than crime." Her words lingered in him. He didn't reply. He just tightened the reins and led the horse onward, toward the unknown line where safety ended and fate waited. They rode until dusk, silhouettes against a wall of red sky, an outlaw and a judge's daughter, each unaware that the other held the one chance they'd ever have at redemption. They rode into rough country by dawn, the kind of land that swallowed men whole, the canyons twisted like scars, the wind carrying the scent of rain and sage. Silence followed them, broken only by the groan of his saddle and the rasp of her breath. Silas watched the horizon, every instinct trained on survival. He'd spent years reading the signs of pursuit, the broken stalks of grass, the echo that didn't belong. Boone's riders would come. Men like Boone didn't let go of leverage easily, and the judge's daughter was worth more than gold. Eliza shifted behind him, gripping tighter as they crossed a narrow ridge. "There's no trail," she said. "There never is till you make one," he answered. By midday they found a stunted mesquite grove by a trickle of water that had once been a stream. He set her down, helped her drink, then checked her ankle. The bandage held, but her skin was hot with fever. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." He grunted, using his knife to cut strips of jerky. Resting gets men found. She watched him with quiet curiosity, as though trying to see the person behind the grit. "You move like a soldier," she said, "closer to a man who shouldn't still be alive." The wind carried a sound, faint, distant, a crow, a reminder that death was never far behind in this desert. Silas stared north, where smoke shimmered over the ridges. "Boone's close." Eliza stiffened. "You're sure?" He nodded. "Too many miles of sand to risk waiting. We ride again at first light." That night, they built a weak fire from scrap mesquite. The ground cooled fast, the stars sharp as nails. Eliza sat near the flames, clutching the pendant at her neck. "My father once said mercy weakens justice," she murmured. "Do you think that's true?" Silas poked the embers. "I think most men say things like that till they need mercy themselves." She studied him. "You sound like you know." He didn't answer. Instead, he cleaned the pistol, the motion automatic. Every click a small prayer against what might come. She noticed the steady rhythm, the scars on his hands, the exhaustion he carried like another weapon. When the wind grew colder, a low growl came from the dark. A pair of eyes flickered near the rocks, then another and another. Wolves, half-starved and bold. Silas rose, drew his gun, and stood between her and the dark. The firelight caught the edges of his face, jaw tight, shoulders squared. "Stay low." The first wolf lunged into the firelight. He fired once, the echo cracking across the canyon. It dropped. Two more followed. He moved like instinct itself, reloading, firing, the rhythm as clean as breath. When the last fell, the smoke from his revolver curled into the star-choked sky. Eliza stared at him. "You didn't even hesitate." He sat again, wiping the barrel. "If you pause, you bleed." She said nothing, but her expression softened, somewhere between fear and gratitude. She reached into her pack, tore a strip of cloth, and wrapped the cut on his hand. "You're shaking," she said. "Adrenaline." "No," she whispered. "Something else." He didn't meet her eyes. "I've shot men with less reason." Dawn came pale and brittle. They left the grove before first light, cutting through a canyon carved by years of flash floods. The path wound tight between walls that glowed red in the early sun. Eliza rode beside him now, pushing through her pain. "You never asked what Boone planned to do with me," she said. "Didn't figure I wanted to know." "He said I'd be worth more dead than alive if my father refused him." Silas glanced over. "That sounds like Boone." "Then you knew he'd kill me." "I figured he might." "So why save me?" He slowed the horse, eyes narrowing. "Maybe I'm tired of leaving people to die." Her voice dropped. "What happened between you and him?" He took a long breath. "We were partners. Robbed a coach together once. I pulled the trigger when he was supposed to hold the horses. There were civilians inside. Never forgave myself, not even before the judge's rope." "The stagecoach robbery," she said softly. "You were there." He nodded. "Boone said it'd be easy. He lied. People got killed, I took the blame, and your father made sure I'd hang for it." Eliza stared ahead. "He believes justice can be perfect. Then he's never seen what it costs." By midday, a shot cracked across the valley. A bullet struck the sand near their feet. Silas hauled her down behind a rock. "Go!" he shouted. "Who?" He didn't answer. He returned fire, counting echoes, trying to gauge distance. Boone's men had found them. Another shot split the air, closer this time. He aimed once, sent a rider tumbling from his horse 200 yards away. The others scattered, Regrouping across the rise. "We need height!" he yelled. Eliza followed as he scrambled up a narrow fissure in the cliff. At the top, they collapsed behind a ledge. She was shaking from adrenaline, face pale. He reloaded, breathing hard. They won't stop. Can we outrun them? Not forever. Boone's got numbers, and he knows where I'll go before I do. She touched his shoulder, surprising them both. Then we changed the ending. Her resolve cut through his weariness. He almost smiled, but stopped himself. The chase would end soon, one way or another. He looked at her, saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear anymore, and said quietly, "All right, Miss Harrow, let's see how far redemption can ride." They rode hard as the sun bled into the cliffs, dust rising behind them like ghosts. Boone's riders closed in, shots echoing. The canyon narrowed ahead, a funnel with no return, yet Silas pushed on. The desert devoured their tracks, and for one fierce moment he believed escape might still mean salvation. They didn't stop riding until the sky had turned the color of dying embers. The canyon opened into a stretch of scrubland littered with the remains of an old mining camp. A few timbers, the mouth of a shaft framed by rusted rails. Silas slid from the saddle, gripping his side where an old wound had torn open again. "This'll do," he said, voice thin with exhaustion. Eliza glanced around, wary of the shadows creeping across the rocks. "You think they'll find us here?" "Boone's men don't ride well in the dark. We'll buy a night, maybe two." Inside the tunnel, stale air clung to the walls. They used saddle blankets for warmth. Silas lit a stub of candle, its flame trembling in the draft. He leaned against the rock and tried to slow his breathing. Eliza knelt near him. "You're bleeding again." "I've had worse." He winced as she tore a strip of cloth and pressed it to the wound. In the flickering light, she studied him, the line of his jaw, their sharpness dulled by fatigue. Then her gaze caught something on the wall, a torn, weather-beaten sheet nailed to the beam. "What's that?" He followed her eyes and froze. The paper was a wanted notice. Silas Vance, armed and dangerous. Reward $500, dead or alive. His own face looked back at him like a ghost carved in ink. Her hand trembled as she lifted the page. "You lied to me." Silas said nothing. The candle flame sputtered between them. "You're him," she whispered. "The outlaw my father sentenced. The man who killed those people." He stared at the floor. "I didn't kill them, not on purpose." She stepped back, eyes burning. "You murdered innocents and made my father the villain for doing his job." He raised his hand slowly, weary. "I never said he was wrong." "Then why hide?" "Because no one would listen if they knew my name." She pulled his revolver from his holster before he could move. The barrel glinted in the weak light. "Don't come closer." He didn't. "If you're going to kill me, just don't miss. I'm tired of bleeding slow." Her voice shook. "Tell me why I shouldn't." He looked at her, and for the first time his voice softened. "Because all I ever wanted was to stop running. I was there when Boone planned that stagecoach hit. He swore no one would get hurt, just scare the guards, grab the gold. But the driver panicked, and when the smoke cleared, 2 passengers were down. I took the blame, 'cause Boone said he'd turn himself in later. He never did. Your father looked me in the eye and said redemption was for other men." Her finger hovered over the trigger. The air trembled. In that moment, she saw not a monster, but a man undone by choices that had hardened over time. "I should hate you," she whispered. "Then you already understand me." The sound came first, the ring of distant hooves, then the low clang of metal. Silas turned his head toward the entrance just as a gunshot shattered the quiet. The candle went out. "Down!" he hissed. Sparks rained from the tunnel mouth as bullets tore through splintered beams. Boone's voice bellowed from outside, echoing through the shaft. "No use hiding, partner. You can hand her over or die slow." Eliza ducked beside him, heart hammering. "He found us." "I figured he would." Silas checked his gun. 6 rounds left. "Stay behind the rocks. Don't shoot unless you have to." She grabbed his arm. "You can't take them all." "Then I'll take enough." He stepped into the entrance just as the next volley hit. Sparks and dust filled the air. Silas fired back, a quick succession of shots that cracked through the night. 3 shadows dropped, 2 more closed in. The old tunnel echoed with every gun's report like thunder in a steel drum. A bullet grazed his leg, spinning him to his knee. He reloaded, teeth clenched. Boone shouted something, a crude challenge, and charged through the smoke. Silas fired again, striking the rock near Boone's feet. The blast shook loose chunks of ceiling. "Eliza!" he yelled. "Back deeper!" She refused to move. The roof groaned above them. Boone's men rushed inside, but the narrow passage worked in Silas's favor. He fought like an animal cornered, fists and gun stock when the bullets ran dry. When the last man fell, so did he, dragged down by pain. Eliza crawled to him, pressing his wound. "You're hit bad." "Seen worse," he muttered, though blood painted the dust. "Why keep fighting for me?" she whispered. "You could have left." He opened his eyes barely as glimmer left. "Guess I needed to prove the judge wrong." She tore the bandage tighter, trembling. He watched her hands work, steady despite the tears streaking her face. "You should hate me," he murmured. She met his gaze. "I think I did. Until tonight." Outside, the hooves faded into the dark. Boone's survivors were retreating. The mine was silent again, except for the wind moaning through the cracked timbers. Eliza leaned against the wall beside him. "You saved me twice now." "Don't make it a habit," he said, managing a faint smile. For a long while neither spoke. The candle's stub flickered back to life, casting shadows that danced on the cavern roof. Silas closed his eyes, breathing slow. She stayed there, keeping pressure on his wound, watching the man who'd once been a headline become something painfully human. When dawn finally broke over the desert, she helped him to his feet. The light reached into the tunnel and caught their faces, hers streaked with dust and determination, his lined with regret. He looked at the jagged horizon where Boone had vanished and said quietly, "This bridge is burned, Miss Harrow, but crossing it's the only way home." She nodded, slipping his arm over her shoulder. "Then let's burn together, Mr. Vance." Side by side they stepped into the morning, leaving behind the ghosts of the mine and the past buried within it. Sunrise seeped over the rocks, pale and unforgiving. Silas woke to silence and the sting of reopening wounds. Eliza was gone. Only her pendant glimmered near the fire, a message too heavy for words. His gaze followed the trail of hoof marks leading east, where dust already rose, a sign of Boone's men driving their captive away. For a long moment he sat motionless, the world reduced to heartbeat and wind. Then he forced himself to stand. Pain blurred his vision, but determination steadied it. Boone had taken too much already. One more debt wouldn't matter. He slung his revolver, drew breath through gritted teeth, and started walking. The desert swallowed him whole. Every step left a smear of blood behind. Heat shimmered off the stones like smoke, each mirage another false promise of water. Somewhere ahead, Boone Callister rode with the judge's daughter shackled to his saddle horn. Silas could picture Boone's smirk, the same look he'd worn that day outside Abilene when everything went wrong. The memory rose unbidden. 7 years earlier, Boone had leaned on a tavern rail, grin crooked, whispering like the devil himself. "Just a coach haul, partner. Simple job, no nerves. The law don't even ride that route." Silas had believed him. He'd wanted one good payday to buy his way clean. Then the gunfire, the screaming horses, the driver falling with a hole through his chest. Boone vanished into the smoke, leaving Silas among the dead and caught by the law hours later. The judge's verdict had been swift, hanging by sunrise. But the transport ambush had changed that. Now, at last, he could settle the score properly. Back in the present, dust rolled along the ridgeline, Boone's camp ahead. Silas dropped behind a cluster of boulders, catching sight of tents and horses. In the center, Eliza sat bound, her face streaked with dirt, but fierce with defiance. Boone paced nearby, rifle slung lazy across his shoulder. "You picked a strange savior, miss," Boone drawled. Silas Vance always did have a weakness for lost causes. She spat blood, refusing to answer. "Funny thing," Boone continued, crouching in front of her. "You think saving a girl makes him righteous? He's killed more men than I can count. Only difference between us is I don't pretend otherwise." Eliza met his eyes. "He's worth 10 of you." Boone chuckled. "Then your arithmetic's broken." From his vantage, Silas took aim, vision swimming. He could barely steady the revolver. His hand shook from fever. But waiting wasn't an option. He circled downslope, using rock for cover. Each movement tore his side open a little more. Boone lifted Eliza roughly, voice colder now. "Your father put Silas on the rope once. Maybe it's fitting you watch him die the right way this time." He raised his rifle toward the hills. "Come on out, partner. No use hiding." Silas stepped into view, weak but standing tall. "Let her go, Boone." Boone's laughter rolled across the camp. "After all these years, you still think you get to ask favors?" "Not a favor," Silas said. "A trade." He tossed his revolver forward. It landed in the dust between them. One life for another. Boone eyed him, suspicious amusement giving way to greed. "You're serious." "More than I've ever been." Eliza's voice cut through the haze. "Don't—" Silas ignored her. "She walks free. Then you and I finish this." Boone smirked. "You couldn't draw on me sober, and you're half dead. What kind of ending is that?" "The kind that sticks." Boone shoved Eliza aside, motioned for one of his men to cut her loose. She stumbled clear as Silas stepped forward into the open. The sun burned overhead, and the two former partners stood 10 paces apart, shadows stretching long between them. Boone's grin faltered. "Never thought we'd end like this, Vance." "Neither did I." The wind held its breath. "Draw." Hands blurred. 2 shots cracked almost as one. Boone staggered, bullet punching clean through his shoulder. Silas took a hit low, spinning him sideways. Dust and gun smoke rose together, swallowing both men in choking silence. When it cleared, Boone lay on one knee, trying to raise his rifle again. Silas stepped forward despite the blood soaking his coat, fired once more, and Boone collapsed backward into the dust. Eliza rushed to Silas's side as he dropped to both knees. "You're bleeding too much," she said. "Figured as much." He tried a smile, faint as breath. "Still breathing, though." Boone coughed, clutching his wound, eyes glazing. "Should have let the law hang you." Silas knelt beside him, voice low. "Law already did. Rest of this is mercy." Boone's hand twitched once, then fell still. Around them, the desert was quiet again. The sun dipped toward evening, painting the cliffs in copper and rose. Eliza tore her shawl into strips, pressing them over Silas's wound. He hissed through his teeth, but let her work. "You shouldn't have come after me," she said. He met her eyes. "You shouldn't have believed I wouldn't." They sat together on that ridge, bound by blood and silence, halos of dust swirling in the dying light. From a distance, the sound of riders approached, lawmen, no doubt drawn by the gunfire. Silas heard it and exhaled slowly. "You ought to go," he said. "I'm not leaving." He tried to stand. She stopped him, tears tracing through grime on her cheeks. The thunder of hooves grew louder. "They'll hang you if they find you," she whispered. "Maybe, but at least they'll know who killed Boone." As the first deputy's shout echoed down the trail, Eliza gripped his hand tight. "I won't let them take you alone." He looked toward the horizon, eyes distant. "You don't have to save me, Miss Harrow. Just tell the truth." The riders crested the ridge, rifles drawn. Silas raised empty hands, the ghost of a smile still flickering across his worn face. "Guess the story ain't done yet," he murmured. Eliza squeezed back. "No, but maybe the ending's different this time." The sun slipped behind the hills, throwing long shadows across the bodies and the blood-streaked sand. Boone's empire of cruelty ended there. Silas Vance's reckoning had just begun. Together, they waited for judgment. Two survivors suspended between sin and salvation as night closed in like a final curtain. The town looked smaller than Silas remembered. Dust clung to the church steeple, and the sound of hammering echoed from the gallows they'd built for him once before. Now he rode at the center of a lawman's escort, Eliza beside him on horseback. Her face stayed pale, determined, as if every jolt of the reins reminded her what this return meant. People lined the main street, miners, merchants, women with aprons still dusted in flour. They stared in silence until someone spat into the dirt. "Hanging's too kind for the likes of him." The whisper rippled through the crowd like desert wind. Silas didn't flinch. He kept his eyes ahead as they reached the courthouse steps. Judge Nathaniel Harrow stood waiting, robes replaced by plain riding clothes, sun shadowing the deep lines around his mouth. His eyes met Silas's and hardened. "Bring him inside." They stripped away the ropes and pushed Silas into the chamber. The bench loomed above, empty but for the judge himself. Deputies barred the doors. Eliza stepped forward, her chin lifted. "Father," he raised a hand, silencing her. "You'll speak when I say." His gaze turned back to Silas. "You were sentenced to hang, yet here you stand." Silas nodded once. "Guess Providence had other plans." "Providence doesn't spare murderers," Harrow said. "Maybe not," Silas answered quietly, "but it did spare your daughter." That struck deeper than any bullet. The room seemed to shrink until only the three of them remained. Eliza spoke anyway. "He saved me, Father, twice. Boone Callister took me. Silas risked his life to bring me home." The judge's jaw stiffened. "Because he caused the trouble in the first place." She stepped closer. "No, because he refused to let Boone make me another body in the dust. You taught me law without mercy is vengeance. Did you forget?" The judge turned away, walking to the window where sunlight broke across the street. The town, demands justice. And what if justice demands gratitude? She asked. Would you still condemn him? Silas's voice cut through the silence. She's right about one thing, Judge. I've made my peace with whatever end you pick. You hang me, I won't fight it. You let me walk, I won't waste it. You just decide how you want to live with it. Harrow stared at him. The outlaw who once spit on his courtroom, now calm as stone. For a moment, the judge's face softened, but the room had filled with townsfolk demanding a verdict, crying out from the gallery, "He's guilty! He'll ride again!" The judge slammed his hand against the bench. "Quiet!" The voices fell. Eliza waited, breath caught. "The sentence stands," he began, his voice low. "Silas Vance, for crimes of armed robbery and manslaughter, this court—" Then he paused, eyes drifting to his daughter. Her hands shook from holding back tears. He saw the way she leaned toward the outlaw as if his life balanced her own. Something inside the judge cracked like dry wood. "Commutes the former sentence," he finished slowly, "to exile beyond the territory's borders. You will leave by sunset and never return. Should you be seen again within this county, the original judgment resumes." The murmurs erupted again, protests, disbelief, but he silenced them with one glare. "Dismissed!" Eliza's breath left her in a trembling exhale. Silas stood motionless for a moment, then nodded once. "That's fairer than I ever deserved." As the hall cleared, Harrow descended from the bench. For the first time in years, he stood close enough to see the regret in Silas's eyes. "You could have run," he said. "I've been running my whole life. Thought maybe I'd stop for once." The judge hesitated. "She believes in you." "Don't let her waste that," Silas answered. When Harrow turned away, Eliza stepped forward. "Where will you go?" He managed a faint smile. "Somewhere the dust swallows names." She slipped the chain from her neck, the same silver pendant he'd found that stormy night, and placed it in his palm. "Then you keep this so one soul remembers yours." He curled his fingers around it, voice rough. "You tell your father thank you." "I think he already knows." Outside, the sun hung low, throwing the street in gold and shadow. The townsfolk watched as Silas saddled a borrowed horse. He looked back once to see Eliza standing on the courthouse steps, her father beside her. The judge didn't speak, but his nod carried more mercy than any word could hold. Silas touched a finger to his hat brim, then rode west through the open gates. The crowd parted silently. Dust rose, covering his tracks almost as quickly as they formed. By the time the sun set, there was no sign he'd ever been there, except for the faint glimmer of silver in his hand. Weeks later, the ridge where Boone fell lay quiet again. Wild flowers clawed through the cracks between stones, their color lost under heat. Eliza stood there beside her father, holding her hat against the wind. "Strange place for peace," the judge said softly. "Maybe peace doesn't choose its places," she answered. "Maybe it waits for us to earn it." He looked tired, older than she remembered. "Do you still believe in mercy?" "I believe it cost you your robe," she said, eyes on the horizon. He gave a hollow laugh. "A small price if it meant saving what's left of my soul." For a moment, father and daughter simply stood, silent as the land around them. Then he turned away toward the trail. "I'm done with the bench. Let others chase righteousness. I've had my fill." She watched him leave, sunlight catching at his shoulders like forgiveness itself. When he disappeared beyond the ridge, she knelt and placed a single stone by the spot where Boone's blood had stained the dirt. For remembrance, she whispered, and for what was paid here. Far south, in the wind-scoured mesas of New Mexico, a quiet rider stopped at a homestead, under siege. Bandits fled at the crack of a single warning shot. No one knew his name, only that he never drew first. Some said he rode for redemption. Others said for ghosts. Back in town, Eliza told his story to anyone who'd listen, not as legend or outlaw's ballad, but as a measure of what mercy can make of a man left for dead. One evening, she wrote it plain across the judge's old docket before the ink of memory faded. The desert forgets names, but mercy remembers. If you want more tales of the wild frontier, of redemption, ruin, and the thin line between them, subscribe for the next story. There are countless more outlaws whose last rides have yet to be told.